My name is Asila Gali, and I chose hypothyroidism for my final presentation.
Hypothyroidism is when the thyroid gland, which is located in front of the larynx, lacks the production of T3 and T4 hormones. In extreme cases of the lack of production of these hormones has been known to form goiters, which is also known as an enlarged thyroid gland, as seen in the images below. Thyroid-stimulating hormone, also known as TSH, is also involved in this disease. The pituitary gland located in the brain sends these thyroid-stimulating hormones to the thyroid gland in order to stimulate the production of these T3 and T4 hormones. Therefore, when there is an increased amount of TSH in the bloodstream, that is an indication of hypothyroidism. Just to give a bit of a background of this disease, according to the American Thyroid Association, the thyroid gland has had its first issues back in about the 2700 BC. The gland wasn't fully understood until 1543, when the anatomical features were discovered. But after many centuries of dealing with goiters, they were finally understood, along with a physically and mentally stunted growth disease known as cretinism. Iodine was later found to be linked to treating both of these thyroid issues, as it is a building block of T3 and T4 hormones, and therefore makes it required for normal thyroid function. The first issue and endemic of goiters was reported in the Andes in 1824, and the increased prevalence of this disease has caused certain measures to be taken for the prevention of goiters, such as adding iodine to food and water to prevent goiters, since iodine was discovered and found to be effective in treating these goiters. The causes for hypothyroidism include genetics, radiation, congenital disease, iodine deficiency, and autoimmune disease. And then symptoms of this disease include excessive weight gain, fatigue, hair loss, brittle nails and dry skin, constipation, sensitivity to cold. These symptoms can be intensified as the disease progresses and is left untreated, which leads to why this disease is a concern. It can lead to many serious health issues, such as a goiter, as previously mentioned, heart irregularities, birth defects, infertility in women, and degraded mental health. This disease is also a concern, or should be a concern, because the distribution of it is very widespread and global. Leaving this disease untreated can further allow the symptoms to persist and progress into a more life-threatening situation. It has also been linked to negative impacts on the society due to potential risk of mental health issues such as cretinism. Moving on to the geographic side of this disease, it was originated in the Andes with its first endemic presence, and it quickly started to affect other populations in other regions all over the world. It has been found in high and middle developed countries as well as lower developed countries, but for very different reasons. For the higher and developed countries, the presence of hypothyroidism is usually due to an autoimmune destruction, whereas in lower developed countries, it's usually due to the lack of iodine and the lack of resources to provide the iodine for the human body. The epidemiology of the disease is usually targeted for women, children when discussing radiation, being of age 60 years or older. Also, other studies have indicated that Caucasians are more likely to develop hypothyroidism in relation to other races. The Geographical Information System-based case study that I chose is titled Impact of Drinking Water Fluoride on Human Thyroid Hormones, and the journal it was published in was called the International Journal of Internal Medicine. The authors are listed below, as well as the link to the article. The conceptual design for this study was intended to study the impacts of drinking water fluoride on T3, T4, and TSH hormones within the Yod's greater area. Essentially, they wanted to test whether or not fluoride levels had an effect on the development of hypothyroidism. There were 3 main factors tested in this study, the first one being fluoride concentrations of the water, the second one being T3, T4, and TSH hormone levels, and then the last factor was the participant lifestyle or family history. The fluoride concentrations reflect the habitat vertex as it reflects the environment and the pollutants that could have potentially damaged the water supply. The different hormone levels mainly reside in the population vertex as it relates to the makeup of the human body. And the last factor mainly touches on all 3 for the most part. You will see later that this was a survey that asked participants the questions about their life. Therefore, it kind of relates the habitat by their place of residency. It relates the population vertex as they ask questions about age, gender, and genetic diseases from the past history. And also relates to behavior as it discusses diet, exercise, and daily water consumption. Looking at the methodology design of this study, the type of study was a case control in which both groups were chosen from the Yod's Health Study, also known as YAHS project. And this was described as a prospective study that examines the health of people from the Yod's greater area in 2014 to 2016. And these individuals are selected through the cluster sampling method. So out of the 8,724 Yod's samples that were studied until October 2015, 693, which was 8% of the people, did not have any thyroid issues. 228 people from the 693 were chosen as controls. From those, 213 people did not have hypothyroidism and were healthy. 265 people were chosen as cases, and out of these, only 198 had hypothyroidism. The others were diagnosed with other kinds of thyroid issues. 14 parameters were used for the final logistic model in order to be tested as potential risk factors. Some of these factors include gender, amount of exercise, daily water consumption, family disease histories, and other sources of fluorine exposure, such as food and oral care products. So overall, this study was a case control as it has individuals diagnosed with hypothyroidism, aka the cases, and those who were not previously diagnosed with hypothyroidism, which construct the control group, and both exposed and unexposed situations are based on the lower range of fluorine levels versus the higher range of fluoride levels. Now transitioning to the data collection, the study area chosen for this study was the Yod's greater area, as previously mentioned, which is located in Iran. 10 locations were chosen due to the varied fluoride concentrations surrounding the areas, and these locations are listed. For the actual data collection, there were 10 locations, and within these 10 locations, 3 samples were collected 3 times at each location. The SPA-DANS method was utilized during the study in order to determine the concentration of the fluoride in milligrams per liter present in the drinking water. In order to test for hormone levels, they utilized the radioimmunoassay method, and to compare these hormone levels, they had to construct a questionnaire containing 68 questions of parameters that were thought to impact the thyroid gland or were sources of fluoride intake. Continuing the data collection, they utilized the Geographic Information System to map out the zones of varying fluoride levels of the water in each location within each area of study, which can be seen in the map to the right. The technique utilized in this analysis was the multiple ring buffer, which if we go back to lab 3, we can see how this was done. This study does not, however, seem to include the shapefile, which includes the population grid of the cases and controls in this application. To commence the discussion of the results of the study, they first utilized the chi-square test to calculate the distribution of hypothyroidism for both cases and controls, as well as the distribution of fluoride within the cases and controls, and also the distribution of hypothyroidism based on the different levels of fluoride in the drinking water. So looking at the p-values, we can see that for the distribution of hypothyroidism, there was significance between the cases and controls. And there was also significance between the distribution of fluoride. But when you put these two factors together, the distribution was not as significant when looking solely at hypothyroidism and different levels of fluoride in drinking water. These conclusions can be made because as the P level is greater than 0.05, this means that there is no significance between the two variables. Our data was further processed in order to compare each different hormone level to the different concentration of fluoride. And this was done for both cases and controls, and the p-values were calculated as well. Looking at the p-values, they demonstrate that fluoride has an impact on the thyroid hormones, specifically speaking about TSH and T3. The TSH levels for the cases seem to reflect higher levels of TSH exceeding the normal range of hormones, which can be seen at the very bottom under these tables. These TSH levels are mainly seen when there is exposure to higher concentrations of fluoride. And generally speaking, if the concentration of fluoride is below 0.5, it will not have an effect on hypothyroidism in this specific area. The results of the multiple logistic regression model with the p-value, adjusted odds ratios, and the confidence intervals are shown in this table. Only the variables with a p-value less than 0.2 were used on the final logistic model, which was condensed and is shown on the right. Based on this figure, variables associated with hypothyroidism were gender with an odds ratio of 2.5, family history of thyroid disease, which had an odds ratio of 2.7, exercise, which had an odds ratio of 5.34, the presence of diabetes, which had an odds ratio of 3.7, hypertension with an odds ratio of 3.2, and the amount of water consumed per day with an odds ratio of 4. Generally speaking, you can see that each parameter with an odds ratio greater than 1 contributes to the development of hypothyroidism. And looking at this table, we can conclude that not exercising seems to be the greatest contributing factor, followed by drinking 4 glasses or more of water daily. The parameters that contributed to developing hypothyroidism are listed here.